I was 12 years old when my father looked me dead in the eyes and said the words that would haunt me for the next 2 decades. "You were a mistake, Marcus. The biggest mistake your mother and I ever made." The kitchen fell silent, except for the hum of our old refrigerator. Mom was washing dishes at the sink, her shoulders tense, but she didn't turn around. She never turned around when Dad said things like this. My younger sister Emma was upstairs, probably grateful she wasn't the target this time. It was a typical Tuesday evening in our modest 2-story house in Cleveland, Ohio. The kind of house that looked decent from the outside, but held secrets behind its beige vinyl siding. Dad had just gotten home from his job at the steel mill, still wearing his work boots that tracked mud across Mom's freshly mopped floor. He'd been drinking again. I could smell the beer on his breath mixed with the metallic scent of the factory. The argument had started over something small, like they always did. I'd forgotten to take out the trash, and he'd exploded. But this time was different. This time, he didn't just yell about responsibility or respect. This time, he went for the jugular. "Do you know what your mother could have done with her life if you hadn't come along?" His voice was cold, calculated. "She could have finished college, could have been somebody. Instead, she got stuck with you." I stood there in my Batman pajamas, holding the math homework I'd been proud to show him. I'd gotten an A+ on a test that half my class had failed. The paper crumpled in my shaking hands. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a belt around my ribs and was pulling it tighter and tighter. "Richard, please," Mom finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. She still hadn't turned around. "No, Linda. He needs to hear this. He needs to understand what his existence cost us." Dad's eyes never left mine. They were brown, like mine, but his held a coldness that made me want to disappear. We had plans, dreams, and then you came along and ruined everything. The funny thing about devastating moments is how clearly you remember every detail. The way the kitchen light flickered slightly, the smell of the chicken casserole Mom had made for dinner, now cold on the stove, the sound of a dog barking in the distance, the way my stomach dropped like I was falling from a great height. I wanted to say something, to defend myself, to ask why he'd never told me this before, to understand how my existence could be so wrong. But no words came. I just stood there, a skinny kid with messy brown hair and 2 big dreams, learning that the man who was supposed to love me unconditionally saw me as nothing more than a burden. "Go to your room," he said finally, turning away to grab another beer from the fridge. "And don't come down until you figure out how you're going to start making up for the trouble you've caused." I ran upstairs, my socks slipping on the hardwood steps. My room was small, barely big enough for a twin bed, a desk, and a dresser. The walls were covered with posters of basketball players and comic book heroes, men who were strong, who saved people, who mattered. I looked at them now and felt like a fraud. How could I dream of being a hero when my own father saw me as a villain in his story? I cried that night. Not the loud, dramatic crying you see in movies, but the quiet, desperate kind that happens when you're trying not to wake anyone. I buried my face in my pillow and let the words replay in my head. "You were a mistake. The biggest mistake your mother and I ever made." The next morning, I came downstairs to find Dad already gone for work. Mom was making pancakes, humming softly like nothing had happened. When she saw me, she smiled, but her eyes were red and swollen. "Morning, honey. You hungry?" I nodded, sliding into my chair at the kitchen table. The same chair where I'd eaten thousands of meals, where I'd done homework, where I'd listened to my parents argue about money and work and life. It felt different now, tainted by last night's revelation. "Mom," I said quietly as she placed a stack of pancakes in front of me. "Am I really a mistake?" Her hand froze over the syrup bottle. For a long moment, she didn't move, didn't breathe. When she finally looked at me, tears were streaming down her face. "Oh, sweetheart, no, you are not a mistake. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." She knelt beside my chair and pulled me into a hug that smelled like vanilla and sadness. "Your father, he's going through a hard time. He doesn't mean what he says." But I knew she was lying. Not about loving me, I believed that part, but about Dad not meaning what he said. I'd seen the look in his eyes. He'd meant every word. From that day forward, everything changed. I stopped trying to impress him with my grades, my drawings, my small victories. I stopped asking him to play catch or help with my science projects. I became invisible in my own home, and he seemed to prefer it that way. School became my refuge. I threw myself into my studies with an intensity that worried my teachers. I read every book in the library, joined every club that would have me, stayed after school until the janitor had to kick me out. Anything to avoid going home to a man who saw my existence as a cosmic error. My English teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, noticed the change. She was a small woman with kind eyes and a voice that could make Shakespeare sound like a conversation with a friend. One day after class, she asked me to stay behind. "Marcus, is everything okay at home?" The question caught me off guard. I'd become so used to pretending everything was fine that I'd almost convinced myself it was true. "Yes, ma'am. Everything's fine." She studied my face for a long moment. You know, some of the greatest success stories I've heard have come from people who had to overcome difficult beginnings. Sometimes the very things that hurt us most become our greatest motivators. I didn't understand what she meant then. I was just a 12-year-old kid trying to survive each day without falling apart. But her words planted a seed in my mind, a tiny voice that whispered, "Maybe you can prove him wrong." At home, the dynamic continued to deteriorate. Dad barely acknowledged my existence unless it was to criticize something I'd done or failed to do. Mom tried to overcompensate with extra attention and affection, but it felt hollow, tainted by the secret we all carried. Emma, only 8 years old, started having nightmares. She couldn't understand why Daddy was always angry, why Mommy was always sad, why our house felt like a bomb waiting to explode. I started making plans, not concrete plans. I was still just a kid, but dreams that felt more like survival strategies. I would study hard, get into a good college, get a scholarship because we couldn't afford tuition. I would make something of myself despite what he believed about me. I would prove that his biggest mistake was actually his greatest loss. The idea became my lifeline. On nights when I could hear my parents arguing downstairs, when Dad's voice rose to that familiar pitch that meant he was about to say something devastating, I would lie in bed and plan my escape. I would imagine myself successful, respected, happy. I would imagine him realizing what he'd thrown away. But first, I had to survive 6 more years in this house. 6 more years of being reminded daily that I was unwanted, that my life was a burden others had to bear. 6 more years of watching my mother wither under the weight of a marriage that had died long before I was old enough to understand what love was supposed to look like. I learned to be small, to take up as little space as possible. I learned to read the signs, the set of his jaw when he came home angry, the particular tone in his voice that meant I should find somewhere else to be. I became an expert at disappearing, at being present but not noticeable. The worst part wasn't the things he said. It was the things he didn't say. No, "good job" when I made honor roll. No, "I'm proud of you" when I won the school science fair. No, "I love you" ever. Just silence and the occasional reminder that I was a disruption in his otherwise carefully planned life. Some nights, I would sit at my bedroom window and look out at the neighborhood. Other houses had warm lights in their windows, families gathered around dinner tables, fathers helping sons with homework. I would wonder what I had done wrong, what cosmic crime I had committed to deserve a father who couldn't love me. But even then, even at 12 years old, drowning in confusion and pain, something inside me refused to break completely. Maybe it was Mrs. Rodriguez's words. Maybe it was my mother's fierce love, despite her circumstances. Maybe it was just pure stubbornness. But I made a promise to myself that night as I sat by my window. I would not let him be right about me. I would not let his words become my truth. I would become someone he could never have imagined, someone so successful and accomplished that his rejection would become his regret. I didn't know then how hard that path would be, how many times I would stumble and fall, how many nights I would question whether I was really worth the effort. I just knew that I had a choice. I could let his words destroy me, or I could let them forge me into something stronger. The 12-year-old boy who went to sleep that night was different from the one who had woken up that morning. He was harder, more determined, and infinitely more alone. But he was also free in a way he'd never been before. Free from the need for his father's approval, free from the hope that things might change, free to become whoever he wanted to be. regardless of what the man downstairs thought about it. That freedom would be both my salvation and my burden for years to come. High school arrived like a battlefield I was finally ready to fight on. By the time I was 14, I had transformed from that broken 12-year-old into something else entirely. Not yet the man I would become, but no longer the boy who could be destroyed by cruel words. Cleveland Heights High School was a massive brick building that housed nearly 2,000 students from every corner of the city. Rich kids from Shaker Heights mixed with kids like me from working-class neighborhoods, and everyone in between. It was perfect for what I needed: anonymity and opportunity. I threw myself into everything with an intensity that bordered on obsession. While other kids were figuring out their social lives and dating, I was in the library until closing time, studying for SATs I couldn't even take yet. While they were at parties on Friday nights, I was working my first job at Romano's Pizza, saving every dollar I earned. The job at Romano's wasn't glamorous. I washed dishes, cleaned tables, and delivered pizzas on my bike when the regular drivers were busy. But it was mine. The first thing in my life that had nothing to do with my father's opinion of me. Tony Romano, the owner, was a gruff Italian man in his 60s who treated all his employees like family. He didn't care about my home life or my father's disappointment. He cared about whether I showed up on time and did my job well. "You're a good kid, Marcus," he told me one evening as I was mopping the floor after closing. "You've got something most kids don't have. You understand that nothing comes easy." His words meant more to me than he could have known. At home, I was still the unwanted mistake. But at Romano's, I was Marcus, the reliable one. Marcus who never complained. Marcus who worked harder than anyone else. The money I earned went into a coffee can, hidden under my bed. Dollar by dollar, shift by shift, I was building my escape fund. I calculated obsessively. How much for college applications? How much for a security deposit on an apartment? How much to survive the first few months on my own? Every crumpled bill represented freedom. At school, I discovered I had a talent for numbers. Math had always come easily to me. But in high school, I started seeing patterns and connections that fascinated me. My economics teacher, Mr. Chen, noticed my aptitude and suggested I join the academic decathlon team. "You have a natural understanding of economic principles," he told me after class one day. "Have you considered studying business or finance?" I hadn't, actually. I'd been so focused on just getting out that I hadn't thought much about what I wanted to do once I was free. But the idea intrigued me. Business meant money, and money meant power, and power meant never having to depend on anyone who didn't want me around. The academic decathlon team became my second family. We met 3 times a week after school, studying everything from art history to quantum physics. The team was made up of kids like me, the ones who found refuge in achievement, who understood that knowledge was the only currency that couldn't be taken away from you. Sarah Chen, Mr. Chen's daughter and the team captain, became my first real friend. She was brilliant, driven, and came from a family that actually supported her dreams. Sometimes I would go to her house to study, and I would marvel at how her parents asked about her day, helped with her homework, celebrated her victories. It was like watching a foreign film with subtitles. I could understand what was happening, but it felt completely alien to my experience. "Your family seems really nice," I told her one evening, as her mother brought us homemade dumplings while we studied. "They are," she said simply, then looked at me with curious eyes. "You don't talk about your family much." I shrugged, focusing on the economics textbook in front of me. Not much to say. She didn't push, which I appreciated. Sarah had a way of understanding what you needed without you having to explain it. She knew I needed acceptance without judgment, challenge without pressure, friendship without strings attached. Through the academic decathlon, I discovered my first real talent: public speaking. When it came time to present our research or compete in speech events, something clicked for me. All those years of staying silent, of swallowing words and hiding thoughts, had created a pressure that found its release on stage. The first time I won a speech competition, I felt a rush unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Standing behind that podium, holding a small trophy, I realized that I had something valuable to offer the world. My ideas mattered. My voice had power. I started entering every speech and debate competition I could find. Regional competitions, state tournaments, national events. If there was a stage and a chance to win, I was there. The trophies and certificates filled a box under my bed, right next to the coffee can of money. Evidence that I was becoming someone worth knowing. My junior year, everything changed. I was 16, working 20 hours a week at Romano's, maintaining a 4.0 GPA, and captaining the debate team when opportunity knocked in the form of a business plan competition. The local Chamber of Commerce was sponsoring a contest for high school students. Create a business plan for a company that could realistically be started with $10,000 or less. The winner would receive a $5,000 scholarship and mentorship from local business leaders. I spent 3 weeks crafting my presentation. My idea was simple but scalable. A lawn care service that focused on eco-friendly practices and employed high school students during summer months. I called it Green Future Landscaping, and I built out every detail from startup costs to 5-year projections. The night before the competition, I practiced my presentation in the mirror for hours. I thought about all the speeches I'd given, all the debates I'd won, all the nights I'd stayed up late planning my escape from a house where I wasn't wanted. This was bigger than all of that. This was my shot at proving that the mistake my father saw could actually create something valuable. The competition was held at the Cleveland Convention Center in a ballroom filled with business professionals, educators, and other students. I was one of 12 finalists, the only one from my high school, and definitely the only one whose presentation clothes came from Goodwill. When they called my name, I walked to that podium with my chin up and my shoulders back. I looked out at the audience and saw faces that reminded me of my father. Successful, skeptical, ready to judge. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of their judgment. I had something to prove, and I finally had the tools to prove it. Green Future Landscaping isn't just about cutting grass, I began, my voice steady and strong. It's about creating opportunities for young people like me who understand that success isn't given, it's earned. For the next 15 minutes, I laid out my vision with passion and precision. I talked about profit margins and environmental impact. I discussed hiring practices and growth strategies. I answered every question with confidence backed by research. When I finished, the applause was different from what I'd heard in school competitions. It was the sound of adults taking a teenager seriously, of professional respect earned rather than given. I won first place. Standing on that stage, holding the check for $5,000, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just a high school competition anymore. This was proof that I could compete in the adult world and win. This was evidence that my ideas had value, that my voice deserved to be heard, that my existence was anything but a mistake. The mentorship that came with the award connected me with Robert Harrison, a successful real estate developer who had built his company from nothing. Bob, as he insisted I call him, was everything I'd hoped a father figure could be. Supportive but challenging, encouraging but realistic. "You've got something special, Marcus," he told me during our first meeting at his downtown office. "Raw talent, drive, and most importantly, you understand what it means to work for what you want. But talent without direction is just wasted energy. Let me help you focus that drive." Bob became the first adult male in my life who saw potential instead of problems. He taught me about real estate, about business relationships, about the difference between working hard and working smart. But most importantly, he showed me what it looked like when a successful man chose to invest in someone else's future. Under his guidance, I started my first real business the summer before my senior year. Green Future Landscaping wasn't just a competition idea anymore. It was a real company with real clients and real employees. I hired 6 other students from my school, bought used equipment with my pizza delivery savings, and spent that summer learning what it really meant to be responsible for other people's livelihoods. The business was small, but it was profitable. More than that, it was mine. Every satisfied customer, every successful job, every dollar earned was proof that I could create value in the world. I wasn't just the mistake my father saw. I was someone who could solve problems, who could lead people, who could build something from nothing. By the time senior year started, I was a different person entirely. I had money in the bank, a successful business, college acceptance letters, and a scholarship that would cover most of my tuition. But more than any of that, I had confidence. Not the fake confidence of someone trying to convince themselves they matter, but the real confidence that comes from proving your worth over and over again. The boy who had cried silently into his pillow at 12 was gone, replaced by a young man who had learned that the only opinion that really mattered was his own. I had built myself from nothing, and no one could take that away from me. But even as I celebrated these victories, even as I prepared to leave for college and start the next chapter of my life, there was still a part of me that wondered if I was doing all of this to prove something to the man who had called me a mistake. Was I building success to show him he was wrong, or was I building it for myself? It would take years for me to understand the difference, and even longer to realize that it didn't matter. What mattered was that I was becoming the person I was meant to be, regardless of who was or wasn't watching. The house I grew up in still felt cold and unwelcoming, but it no longer felt like a prison. I had the key to my own future now, and I was ready to use it. College was supposed to be my great escape, but Ohio State University felt more like a launching pad than a refuge. I arrived in Columbus with 2 suitcases, a laptop that Bob Harrison had given me as a graduation gift, and a determination that bordered on desperation. My dorm room was a standard double in Park Stradley Hall, which I shared with Jake Morrison, a kid from suburban Chicago whose biggest worry seemed to be whether his Xbox would fit on his desk. Jake was friendly enough, but watching him unpack boxes sent by loving parents while I arranged my few belongings made the contrast between our lives impossible to ignore. "Your parents coming to help you move in?" Jake asked, as he hung up polo shirts that probably cost more than I made in a week at Romano's. "They're busy," I said, which was technically true. Dad was working, Mom was taking care of Emma, and none of us had ever entertained the fantasy that they'd drive me to college like some kind of celebration. The truth was simpler and more painful. They hadn't offered, and I hadn't asked. I threw myself into college life with the same intensity I'd brought to everything else. While other freshmen were figuring out how to do laundry and navigating social hierarchies, I was already planning my major, researching professors, and looking for opportunities to distinguish myself. I chose to study finance and economics with a minor in real estate development. The decision was purely strategic. I wanted to understand money at every level, from personal finance to global markets to property investment. Bob Harrison had taught me that real estate was where generational wealth was built, and I was determined to learn everything I could about it. My professors quickly noticed my hunger for knowledge. Dr. Patricia Williams, who taught Introduction to Finance, called me into her office after the 3rd week of classes. "Mr. Thompson," she said, gesturing for me to sit in the chair across from her desk. "I've been teaching this course for 15 years, and I've rarely seen a freshman so engaged with the material. Are you considering graduate school?" I hadn't been, actually. I'd been so focused on just getting through college that I hadn't thought much about what came after. But the idea intrigued me. "I'm focused on getting real-world experience," I told her. "I want to understand how these principles work in practice, not just in theory." She smiled. "Excellent attitude. There's an internship program with some of the top financial firms in Columbus. Most students don't apply until their junior year, but I think you should consider it. The application deadline is next month." That night, I researched every financial firm in the city. I read about their histories, their specialties, their recent deals. I studied the backgrounds of their executives, their company cultures, their client bases. By the time I submitted my applications, I knew more about these companies than some of their own employees. 3 firms called me for interviews. The first 2 went well, but the third one, at Carson & Associates, a boutique investment firm, was something special. The interview was with Michael Carson himself, the firm's founder and a legend in Ohio's financial community. Carson was in his early 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see right through you. His office overlooked downtown Columbus, with diplomas from Harvard Business School and the Wharton School flanking a window that offered a view of the Scioto River. "So, Mr. Thompson," he said, leaning back in his chair and studying my resume, "you're a freshman, you have no formal finance experience, and you think you're ready to work for one of the most respected investment firms in the state. Tell me why I shouldn't throw your application in the trash right now." The question was designed to intimidate, but I'd been through worse. I thought about my father's words, about all the times I'd been told I wasn't good enough, wasn't wanted, wasn't worth the effort. This was just another version of the same test, and I'd been preparing for it my whole life. Because I'm not here to learn on your dime, Mr. Carson. I'm here to earn my place, I said, looking him directly in the eye. I've run a successful business since I was 16. I understand P&L statements, cash flow management, and client relations. Most importantly, I understand that success isn't about where you start. It's about how hard you're willing to work to get where you want to go. He raised an eyebrow. And where do you want to go? I want to build something that matters. I want to help people create wealth and security for their families. And I want to prove that talent and determination matter more than connections and advantages. Carson was quiet for a long moment, then smiled. You start Monday, 20 hours a week, $15 an hour, and you'll do whatever needs doing, filing, research, coffee runs, whatever. But if you prove yourself, there will be opportunities to learn and grow. I worked at Carson & Associates for the next 3 years, starting as a glorified intern and gradually earning more responsibility. I learned to analyze investment opportunities, prepare client presentations, and understand the complexities of portfolio management. But more than the technical skills, I learned how successful people thought, how they made decisions, how they built and maintained relationships. Michael Carson became another mentor, though he was very different from Bob Harrison. Where Bob was warm and encouraging, Carson was demanding and precise. He pushed me harder than any teacher or coach ever had, but he also gave me opportunities that other students could only dream of. Thompson, he said one day during my junior year, I'm putting you on the Henderson account. It's a $50 million portfolio, and Mrs. Henderson specifically requested someone hungry and detail-oriented. Don't screw this up. Mrs. Elizabeth Henderson was a widow in her 70s who had inherited a fortune from her late husband's manufacturing business. She was sharp, sophisticated, and had no patience for young men who thought they knew everything. Our first meeting was intimidating. She grilled me about everything from market trends to economic theory to my personal background. So, Mr. Thompson, she said, sipping tea in her elegantly appointed living room in Upper Arlington, why should I trust a college student with my life savings? Because I understand what it means to have everything on the line, I replied honestly. You worked your whole life to build this wealth. It represents security, independence, and the ability to take care of the people you love. I'll treat your money like it's my own, with respect, careful analysis, and a long-term perspective. She studied me for a moment, then smiled. Carson was right about you. You understand what matters. Managing Mrs. Henderson's portfolio taught me lessons no textbook could provide. She wasn't just a client. She became a teacher, sharing stories about her late husband's business philosophy, her own experiences as a woman in male-dominated circles, and the importance of building relationships based on trust and results. Under her guidance and Carson's mentorship, I developed an investment strategy that balanced growth with security, taking calculated risks while protecting core assets. Her portfolio grew by 18% in my first year managing it, and she began referring other wealthy clients to our firm specifically to work with me. You have a gift for this, Carson told me as we reviewed year-end numbers. But more than that, you have the character for it. Clients trust you because you genuinely care about their success. By my senior year, I was essentially working full-time while maintaining a 3.9 GPA. I had my own office at Carson & Associates, a small but growing client base, and a reputation as someone who could deliver results. When graduation approached, Carson made me an offer. I want you to stay on full-time as an associate, starting salary of $85,000, plus bonuses based on portfolio performance. You'll have your own clients and full support to build your practice however you see fit. It was more money than my father had ever made at the steel mill. It was recognition, respect, and the beginning of the financial independence I'd dreamed of since I was 12 years old. But it was also just the beginning. I rented a one-bedroom apartment in the short north, Columbus's Arts District, and bought my first car, a used BMW that was 3 years old, but still felt like a luxury to someone who had grown up taking the bus everywhere. The apartment was small but modern, with exposed brick walls and large windows that let in plenty of light. It was mine, purchased with money I'd earned, furnished with items I'd chosen. No one could take it away from me or make me feel unwelcome in my own space. The work at Carson and Associates was demanding but rewarding. I was managing nearly $200 million in client assets by my second year, and my portfolio performance consistently ranked in the top 10% of the firm. I was building a reputation not just locally but regionally, as word spread about the young advisor who treated every client's money like it was his own. But success in finance was just the foundation for what I really wanted to build. I started studying real estate more seriously, attending auctions, analyzing market trends, and networking with developers and property managers. Bob Harrison had been right. Real estate was where generational wealth was created, and I was determined to get my piece of it. My first investment property was a duplex in Clintonville, a neighborhood just north of downtown that was starting to show signs of gentrification. The building was a mess: peeling paint, outdated plumbing, tenants who hadn't paid rent in 3 months. But I saw potential where others saw problems. I bought the property for $85,000, put another $25,000 into renovations, and had it fully rented within 6 months at rates 40% higher than the previous owner had been charging. The monthly cash flow wasn't huge, but it was positive, and more importantly, it was the beginning of a real estate portfolio that would eventually transform my life. Over the next few years, I acquired more properties: single-family homes, small apartment buildings, commercial spaces. I reinvested every dollar of profit back into new acquisitions, building a portfolio that generated passive income while appreciating in value. By the time I turned 26, I was managing over $500 million for my clients at Carson and Associates, and personally owned 18 investment properties worth nearly $3 million. I was financially independent, professionally respected, and personally fulfilled in ways I'd never imagined possible. But there was still something missing. Despite all my success, despite proving every doubter wrong, there was a part of me that felt empty. I had built an impressive life, but I'd built it alone. I had professional relationships and friendly acquaintances, but no one who really knew the boy who had started this journey by being called a mistake. Late at night in my apartment, surrounded by the evidence of my success, I would sometimes think about my family. Mom called occasionally, updating me on Emma's high school activities and Dad's health problems. Emma herself had started college at Case Western, studying engineering with a full scholarship she'd earned through her own academic excellence. But Dad and I hadn't spoken directly in years. Not since the day I'd left for college, when he'd watched me load my suitcases into Bob Harrison's car without saying goodbye or good luck or anything at all. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I'd moved beyond needing his approval or acknowledgement. I told myself that success was its own reward, that proving him wrong was victory enough. But deep down, in the quiet moments between deals and decisions, I wondered if he ever thought about me. If he ever saw my name in the business section of the paper or heard someone mention the young financial advisor making waves in Columbus. If he ever regretted the words he'd spoken to a 12-year-old boy who just wanted his father to be proud of him. Success had given me everything I dreamed of: money, respect, independence, security. But it hadn't answered the question that had driven me since that night in the kitchen. Could I ever be enough to change his mind about me? That question would haunt me for years to come, shaping decisions I didn't even realize I was making, driving me toward a success that was both salvation and prison. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March, just as I was reviewing quarterly reports for my largest client. I was 32 years old, managing partner at what was now Harrison Thompson Wealth Management, and owner of a real estate portfolio worth over $15 million. My assistant, Rachel, knocked on my office door with an unusual expression. "Marcus, there's a call for you online too. It's your sister." I hadn't heard from Emma in 6 months. We kept in touch sporadically. Birthday calls, holiday texts, the occasional update on our vastly different lives. She was finishing her doctorate in biomedical engineering at Johns Hopkins, brilliant and driven in her own quiet way. Our relationship was warm but distant, shaped by the reality that we'd essentially grown up in different houses, with me leaving for college when she was only 14. "Emma," I said, picking up the phone. "This is a surprise. How are you?" "Marcus." Her voice was strained, tired in a way that immediately put me on alert. "I need to talk to you about Dad." My stomach dropped. In all the years since I'd left home, Through all my success and achievements, I'd never quite resolved my feelings about the man who had shaped my drive to succeed. He was still my father, despite everything, and the complicated mixture of anger, disappointment, and buried love was something I'd never fully sorted through. "What's wrong?" I asked. "He's sick, Marcus. Really sick. The doctors say it's ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. He has maybe 2 years, probably less." The words hit me like a physical blow. ALS. I knew enough about the disease to understand what it meant. Progressive muscle weakness, eventual paralysis, and a cruel clarity of mind as your body slowly shuts down around you. "How long have you known?" I asked. "They diagnosed him 3 weeks ago. Mom didn't want to call you. She said you had your own life and didn't need to be burdened with this." Emma's voice cracked slightly. "But Marcus, he's going to need help. More help than Mom can provide. The house is falling apart. The medical bills are already piling up, and his insurance isn't covering everything." I closed my eyes and leaned back in my chair. Through my office window, I could see downtown Columbus bustling with activity, people going about their lives, building their futures, chasing their dreams. I had worked so hard to separate myself from that house in Cleveland, from the man who had made me feel worthless. And now, somehow, I was being pulled back into their orbit. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "I don't know. Maybe nothing. I just thought you should know." She paused. "Marcus, I know things were complicated between you two, but he's still our father." After hanging up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring at the financial reports spread across my mahogany desk. Everything I had built, every success I had achieved, every dollar I had earned, it all felt suddenly hollow in the face of this news. That evening, I drove to Cleveland. I hadn't been back to my childhood home in over a decade. The neighborhood looked smaller than I remembered, shabbier. The houses that had seemed normal when I was growing up now looked tired and worn. Economic changes had hit this part of the city hard, and it showed in the empty lots where houses used to stand, the boarded-up windows, the general air of decline. Our house, 1247 Maple Street, looked the worst of all. The vinyl siding was cracked and discolored. The front porch sagged noticeably, and what had once been Mom's carefully tended garden was now overgrown with weeds. My father's truck, the same blue Ford he'd driven when I was a kid, sat in the driveway with rust eating through the wheel wells. I sat in my BMW for several minutes, gathering the courage to knock on the door. This was the house where I'd been told I was a mistake, where I'd learned to make myself invisible, where I'd planned my escape for 6 long years. Coming back felt like regression, like admitting defeat. Mom answered the door, and the shock on her face was immediately replaced by joy. She looked older, much older than her 58 years. Her hair was completely gray now, and worry lines had etched themselves deep around her eyes. "Marcus, oh my God, sweetheart, what are you doing here?" She pulled me into a hug that smelled like the same vanilla perfume she'd worn my entire childhood. "Emma called me," I said simply. "I came to see how you're doing." She led me into the living room, which looked exactly as I remembered it. The same brown couch, the same coffee table with scratches from Emma's art projects, the same family photos on the mantel. Except now, there were pill bottles scattered across the end table and a hospital bed set up where Dad's recliner used to be. "He's sleeping," Mom said quietly. "The medication makes him tired, but Marcus, he's going to be so... it's been so long." I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. She wasn't sure how he would react to seeing me, and honestly, neither was I. "How bad is it?" I asked. "It's progressing faster than the doctors expected. He's already having trouble with his hands, and his speech is starting to slur. The worst part is..." She stopped, struggling with the words. "The worst part is that he knows exactly what's happening to him. His mind is completely clear." We talked for an hour about practical things. Medical costs, insurance claims, the modifications the house would need as his condition worsened. I learned that they'd already spent their modest savings on treatments and equipment. Dad's disability payments barely covered the mortgage, and Mom had taken a part-time job at a local grocery store to help with expenses. "We'll figure it out," she kept saying, but I could see the fear in her eyes. They were drowning financially, and she was too proud to ask for help. When Dad finally woke up, I heard his voice calling for Mom. It was weaker than I remembered, but still unmistakably his. My heart rate spiked as she went to help him. and I heard them talking in low voices. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the tone of surprise when she told him I was there. "He wants to see you," she said when she returned. "But Marcus, he's not the same man who... Well, he's changed." I followed her to the makeshift bedroom in what used to be the dining room. Dad was propped up in a hospital bed, looking smaller and frailer than I'd ever seen him. His hair was completely white now, and his hands shook slightly as he tried to adjust his position. When he saw me, his eyes widened with something I couldn't quite identify. Surprise, maybe, or fear, or something deeper. "Marcus," his voice was barely above a whisper, slurred but understandable. "You came." "Hi, Dad." I stood awkwardly by the foot of his bed, unsure how to navigate this moment. "How are you feeling?" He tried to laugh, but it came out as more of a cough. "Like I'm dying, son." "Because I am." The directness of it caught me off guard. This wasn't the man who had hidden behind anger and alcohol for most of my childhood. This was someone who had been stripped of everything but honesty by the reality of his mortality. "The doctors say you have some time," I said. "Time." He repeated the word like it was foreign to him. Funny how time works, isn't it? When you think you have forever, you waste it. When you find out it's limited, you realize how much you've already thrown away. We sat in uncomfortable silence for several minutes. I could hear Mom moving around in the kitchen, probably giving us space to talk. Emma was right. He was still our father, despite everything. But I didn't know how to bridge the gap that 20 years of anger and resentment had created. "I hear you've done well for yourself," he said finally. "Your mother shows me newspaper articles sometimes. Financial advisor, real estate developer. Quite a success story." I nodded, unsure how to respond. Was this praise? An acknowledgement? Or just an observation? "I suppose you're wondering why I never..." He struggled to find the words, his condition making speech more difficult than it used to be. "Why I never said I was proud of you." Actually, I wasn't wondering that anymore. I'd given up expecting anything from him years ago, but I found myself curious about his answer anyway. "I was afraid," he said simply. "Afraid that if I acknowledged how remarkable you were becoming, it would somehow make my own failures more obvious. Afraid that if I celebrated your success, I'd have to admit how badly I'd failed as a father." The confession hung in the air between us. I had spent 20 years imagining this conversation, but it had never gone like this in my fantasies. I had imagined anger, arguments, demands for apologies. I had never imagined this quiet, broken honesty. "You weren't a mistake, Marcus. You were never a mistake. You were the best thing I ever had a hand in creating, and I was too much of a coward to see it." Tears were rolling down his cheeks now. "I destroyed my relationship with my son because I couldn't face my own inadequacies. And now I'm dying, and there's no time to fix it." I felt something crack open inside my chest. Not forgiveness, exactly, but something softer than the anger I'd carried for so long. This man in the hospital bed wasn't the father who had called me a mistake. He was just a sick, scared human being facing the end of his life with regrets he couldn't undo. "There's still time," I heard myself saying. "Maybe not to fix everything, but there's still time." I spent the next several hours getting a full picture of their financial situation. It was worse than Emma had indicated. They were 3 months behind on the mortgage, facing foreclosure proceedings. The medical bills were overwhelming, and Dad's condition would require expensive equipment and round-the-clock care as it progressed. That night, I checked into a hotel and spent hours on my laptop and phone. By morning, I had a plan. I paid off their mortgage in full, $47,000 that barely made a dent in my investment portfolio. I arranged for contractors to begin renovations that would make the house fully accessible. Ramps, a proper bathroom for someone with limited mobility, wider doorways, professional-grade medical equipment. I set up a trust fund that would cover all of Dad's medical expenses and provide Mom with a comfortable living allowance for the rest of her life. But most importantly, I made a decision that surprised even me. I would move back to Cleveland. "You don't have to do this," Mom said when I told her my plan. "We can't ask you to give up your life in Columbus." "You're not asking," I replied. "I'm choosing." I bought a house 3 blocks away, a beautiful Victorian that had been foreclosed on and sat empty for 2 years. It needed extensive renovation, but it had good bones and would give me a project to focus on while I figured out how to be a son to a dying father. The next few months were unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I split my time between managing my business remotely and spending hours at my parents' house. I watched my father slowly lose the ability to feed himself, to write, to walk, but I also got to know him in a way I never had before. Without the armor of anger and alcohol that had defined our relationship, he was actually an interesting person. He told me stories about his childhood, about meeting Mom, about his dreams of opening his own auto repair shop before life got in the way. He shared his thoughts about books he was reading, current events, the changing neighborhood. "I should have told you this years ago," he said one afternoon as I helped him eat lunch. "But watching you build your business, seeing how you treat people, how you solve problems, you've become everything I wished I could be." "You still can be," I said. "You're still here. We're still talking." He smiled, the first genuine smile I could remember seeing from him in decades. "You know what I regret most?" "What?" "I never got to see you play Little League baseball. You asked me so many times to come to your games and I always had an excuse. Work, or I was tired, or there was something on TV. But the truth was, I was afraid I'd embarrass you. I was afraid the other dads would see what a failure I was." I remembered those games, remembered scanning the bleachers for his face and never finding it. But somehow, hearing the reason behind his absence made it hurt less. "We could watch a game together now," I suggested. "Baseball season's starting." So we did. I brought a portable TV into his room and we watched the Indians play the Yankees. He explained strategies I'd never understood, shared memories of players from when he was young, and cheered with an enthusiasm I'd never seen from him before. It became our routine. Every few days, I would come over and we would watch a game together. Sometimes we talked about baseball, sometimes about life, sometimes we just sat in comfortable silence. I was getting to know my father for the first time, and he was getting to know the man his son had become. The renovations on my new house were progressing slowly, which was fine with me. I wasn't in a hurry to live there alone. I was learning to appreciate this time with my family, strange and bittersweet as it was. One evening, as I was helping Mom with dinner preparations, she pulled me aside. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Your father asks about you every day. Not just how you're doing, but specific things. He wants to know about your business deals, your properties, your plans for the future. He's so proud of you, Marcus, even if he can't always express it the way he should." "I know," I said. And I did know, finally. The end came faster than any of us expected. Dad went from needing assistance with meals to being completely bedridden in just 3 weeks. His speech became almost unintelligible, but his eyes remained alert and focused. On his last day, I sat by his bedside holding his hand. He couldn't speak anymore, but he squeezed my fingers with what little strength he had left. Mom and Emma were there too, and we took turns sharing memories, telling him how much we loved him, promising to take care of each other. Just before he died, he looked directly at me and mouthed words I could barely make out. "I'm sorry. I love you." I squeezed his hand and whispered back, "I love you too, Dad. I forgive you." He died peacefully that night, with his family around him and his regrets finally spoken. At the funeral, I gave the eulogy. I talked about the man he had been in his final months, thoughtful, engaged, loving in ways he'd struggled to express before. I talked about second chances and the importance of family. I talked about forgiveness and how it frees both the forgiver and the forgiven. After the service, dozens of people came up to me. Neighbors, co-workers, old friends of my parents. They all had stories about my father I'd never heard. Times he'd helped people in need. Advice he'd given. Quiet acts of kindness he'd never mentioned at home. "Your dad was so proud of you," his former supervisor at the steel mill told me. "He used to show everyone pictures from the newspaper when your business got written up. He'd tell anyone who'd listen about his son, the successful businessman." It was surreal to learn that the man who had made me feel invisible at home had been bragging about me to strangers for years. But it also made sense in a way. He'd been proud, but unable to express it, held back by his own shame and inadequacy. After the funeral, Emma returned to Baltimore to finish her doctorate, and I was left alone with Mom in a house that felt empty, despite being full of memories. We spent long evenings talking about Dad, about our family, about the future. "What will you do now?" she asked me one night over dinner. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "I need to figure out what I want my life to look like going forward. The truth was, Dad's death had changed something fundamental in me. The drive that had powered my success for 20 years, the need to prove I wasn't a mistake, was gone. He had acknowledged my worth before he died. He had told me he was proud. The question that had haunted me since I was 12 finally had an answer. But that left me with a new question. If I wasn't driven by the need to prove my father wrong anymore, what was I driven by? 6 months after Dad's funeral, I made another life-changing decision. I sold my business in Columbus for more money than I'd ever imagined having. I kept my real estate portfolio but hired a management company to handle the day-to-day operations. I was 33 years old and essentially retired, with enough passive income to live comfortably for the rest of my life. Mom was confused by my decision. "You worked so hard to build that business, sweetheart. Are you sure you want to give it up?" I was sure. The business had served its purpose. It had made me financially independent and given me the resources to take care of my family when they needed it most. But I didn't need to manage other people's money anymore. I had proven everything I needed to prove, to my father and to myself. Instead, I decided to focus on what I'd learned I actually cared about, helping other people who felt like mistakes learn that they weren't. I used a portion of the money from selling my business to establish the Thompson Foundation, a nonprofit organization that provided college scholarships and business mentorship to young people from challenging family situations. Kids who felt unwanted, unworthy, invisible. Kids like I had been. The foundation's first office was in Cleveland, 3 blocks from the house where I'd grown up feeling like a burden. It felt like completing a circle, taking the pain that had driven me to success and transforming it into something that could help others avoid that same pain. Mom became the foundation's first volunteer, helping interview scholarship candidates and coordinate mentorship programs. She understood better than anyone what it meant to watch a child struggle with feeling unwanted. "Your father would be so proud of this," she told me as we reviewed applications from local high school students. "He always wanted to matter, to make a difference. Through you, he finally does." 5 years later, the Thompson Foundation had awarded over 200 scholarships and helped dozens of young entrepreneurs start their first businesses. We had offices in 6 cities and a waiting list of mentors who wanted to share their knowledge with the next generation. I still lived in Cleveland, in the Victorian house I'd renovated while Dad was dying. It was beautiful now. Hardwood floors, exposed brick, modern kitchen, library filled with books on business and philosophy and personal growth. But the most important part of the house was my office, where I kept a photo of Dad from his last months. In the picture, he's smiling as we watch a baseball game together. His eyes are clear and happy, and for once, he looks proud instead of disappointed. It reminds me that people can change, that relationships can heal, that it's never too late to choose love over resentment. The boy who cried himself to sleep at 12, believing he was a mistake, had grown into a man who understood that mistakes are just detours on the path to becoming who you're meant to be. My father's inability to love me properly had driven me to achieve things I never could have imagined. His death had taught me that success without forgiveness is hollow, but success with forgiveness can change the world. I never did build that house for him to live in. By the time I had the resources and the relationship to make that gesture, he was already too sick to enjoy it. But I had built something better, a life that honored both his love and his failures, that transformed his regrets into my purpose. Every day, young people walk into our foundation offices feeling like mistakes, just like I once did. And every day, we get to tell them the truth. You're not a mistake. You're a miracle waiting to happen. You just need someone to believe in you until you learn to believe in yourself. My father said I was a mistake, but in the end, his mistake was not seeing that his broken love could create something beautiful. His silence taught me to speak up for others. His absence taught me to be present. His regrets taught me to live without them. The house I built wasn't made of wood and stone. It was made of forgiveness, purpose, and the understanding that our deepest wounds can become our greatest strengths. And in that house, built from the ashes of a broken relationship, we all live in grace instead of silence. That's the real victory, not proving him wrong, but proving that love can grow from the most unlikely soil, and that even mistakes can become miracles if we're willing to do the work of transformation.